realm of Orthodox spirituality, the human experience is understood as a journey of transformation, a pilgrimage towards union with God. This path, however, is not without its obstacles. Orthodox tradition speaks of passions as inclinations that pull us away from God and towards self-centeredness. These passions are not inherently evil, but rather distortions of our natural faculties. The 8 primary passions, according to the Church Fathers, are gluttony, lust, avarice, anger, sadness, despondency, vainglory, and pride. Each of these passions represents a battlefield within us, a struggle between our higher and lower selves. They are temptations that can lead us astray from our spiritual purpose. These passions are interconnected, often feeding off one another and creating a complex web of desires and attachments. Overcoming these passions is a lifelong endeavor, requiring vigilance, humility, and the grace of God. It is within this context of the 8 passions that we encounter Acedia, often called the Noonday demon, due to its tendency to strike during periods of inactivity and quiet reflection. This subtle and insidious passion is a formidable foe on the path to spiritual growth. It is a spiritual apathy that can drain our enthusiasm for God and leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled. Acedia is a complex spiritual condition, often misunderstood as mere laziness or boredom. It is a form of spiritual sloth, a weariness of the soul that manifests as a lack of interest in spiritual things. The person experiencing acedia feels a heavy burden of apathy and indifference, particularly towards their spiritual practices. The Desert Fathers, early Christian hermits who sought God in the solitude of the Egyptian desert, were well acquainted with acedia. They described it as a feeling of restlessness and unease, a sense of being trapped and unable to find solace. The noonday demon would tempt them to abandon their prayers, to seek distraction in idle thoughts, or even to despair of ever finding God. Acedia can manifest in various ways. It can be a feeling of restlessness that makes it difficult to sit still and pray. It can also be a sense of boredom with spiritual things, a lack of interest in reading scripture or attending church services. In more severe cases, acedia can lead to despair and a complete loss of faith. While acedia can be intensely personal, its effects often ripple outward. Relationships can suffer as those in the grip of acedia withdraw from loved ones. Responsibilities are neglected, and the world seems to fade into a dull, meaningless blur. Acedia poses a significant threat to spiritual life because it attacks the very core of our relationship with God. It undermines our desire for God, making it difficult to find joy in prayer, worship, and other spiritual practices. Imagine a garden overgrown with weeds. The weeds in this case are like the apathy and indifference of acedia. They choke the life out of the plants, preventing them from flourishing. Similarly, acedia can choke the life out of our spiritual lives, making it difficult to grow in our relationship with God. Acedia can be a cunning enemy, often disguising itself as something else. We might mistake it for fatigue, stress, or even depression. This is why discernment is so crucial. We need to be able to identify the root cause of our spiritual dryness so that we can address it effectively. Left unchecked, acedia can lead to a downward spiral of spiritual apathy. We may find ourselves avoiding prayer and other spiritual disciplines, seeking solace instead in distractions and worldly pursuits. This can create a vicious cycle where our spiritual dryness leads to further withdrawal from God, and our withdrawal from God leads to even greater spiritual dryness. At its root, acedia stems from self-love. When we are in the grip of acedia, we are essentially choosing our own comfort and pleasure over the pursuit of God. We allow our own desires and attachments to take precedence over our relationship with the divine. This self-centeredness manifests in a variety of ways. We may become impatient with the slow, often arduous work of spiritual growth, seeking instead the instant gratification of worldly pursuits. We may become envious of the spiritual progress of others, allowing this envy to poison our hearts and stifle our own growth. Acedia can also lead to a distorted view of ourselves and our place in the world. We may become preoccupied with our own perceived flaws and shortcomings, falling into a pit of self-pity and despair. This self-absorption blinds us to the needs of others and prevents us from experiencing the fullness of life that comes from loving and serving God and our neighbor. Recognizing self-love as the root of acedia is crucial to overcoming this spiritual obstacle. It requires honesty with ourselves, acknowledging our own selfishness and our tendency to prioritize our own needs above all else. This honest self-assessment paves the way for humility, a key ingredient in the antidote to acedia.